Hi, this is a new CG Jam tutorial series. My name's Chris and I'm here to show you how to use Blender's Compositor, and in this series we're going to be specifically focusing on one particular node each episode in order that we can get you up to speed on how to put them together, what the nodes are for, and how to do some really interesting effects. In this first few episodes we're going to be looking at the input nodes, and to start us off we're going to look at render layers. So let's jump in and have a look at the Compositing Workspace, which we can get to from the Layout tab just in the top menu bar. If we just click this button here and choose the Compositing window layout. And here you see that we have our main workspace where we will do all our node work, and below that we have the UV image window and our 3D window as well, where you can see we have already a 3D scene set up. If we look at this, it's just a plane and a ball separated out onto individual layers. And in order to make the best use of those, we're going to use the render layers node. Well, the first thing we need to do is come down here and click the render layers button, like so. And by default we are given our first two nodes, our render layers node and our output composite node, which when we press F12 or hit the render button will give us the cumulative information from everything in our node tree, which currently consists of the two render layers that we have and any other nodes that we may choose to add in later. So the render node itself. This node will produce the output of your 3D scenes camera, where by default we will have access to the rendered image, also any alpha channel that we have rendered, and the Z depth, which we can use to do some basic effects, but they're not entirely useful on their own. In order to make the best of it, we're going to have to render the scene. So let's do that first. First I'll put in the backdrop so that we can view it later, and hit render, and we'll see the scene coming into our UV image editor thanks to our composite output node. There, now you can see the image has been rendered nicely. We have a simple ball on a reflective plane, but we still don't have enough information in our node to make this render useful to us. So we need to come over to our render passes tab, which is next to the little camera icon, and here we have access to all our render layers, which if we look on the bottom of our 3D window you can see the two buttons here. One has the plane, the other has the ball, and to put them together we just need to hold shift and click so that we have both layers active, and this will produce the final output of a single node, the plane and the ball combined together. This is what's known as a combined pass. But in order to make any good effect we need to separate this single render layer over here into its component parts, which we will then be able to select from our render node. So let's do that right now. Let's just click this plus button on the top here. You can see we now have a new render layer called render 001, and our first render just called render layer, and that corresponds to these two down here. And in order to set them up, first let's have a look at the first layer, which is simply our plane. And if we come into our layers tab and choose the first layer, choose the first box in the layers, that will select only that layer to be rendered. Now if we come to render layer 001, which is the ball, and if I hold down shift you can see both layers are together, but if I click on the layers tab only the second layer will be rendered. So let's hit F12 and render that out, and if you watch the UV window you can see both layers now being rendered separately. first the plane. Just let that go a second. Come on, render. There we go. And now we see this ball layer being rendered, and that went a lot quicker. So if we look in the image editor, we can see what we've got finally. If we look in slot 1 here, and you can have up to 8 slots for different renders for comparisons. In slot 1 we have our different render layers waiting for us to choose. So in our render layer we have the plane with the reflection, and in slot render layer 001 we have the sphere. And the composite doesn't have any composite because we have only one render layer to show, which is plugged in. So if we press Shift D and duplicate that, and then switch that one to render 001. So now we have one render layer with the sphere and one with the plane, and we need to combine them together. So two images we can put together with a mix node. If I just drop that one onto this cable, there we go, and connect that one into the bottom, you can see immediately we have a problem. The layers are not combining, and if we swap them around, you can see only the layer in the bottom slot is showing, and if we just put those back so that the sphere is in the bottom one, if we reduce this factor slider to 50%, so we're getting half and half of each image, you can see the images are simply transposed on top of each other, which is a bit of a problem because that's not what we're looking for. What we want is to have the same final output as if we had the two that we had originally with just a single layer. So in order to do that, let's come back over to our composite layers, and we need to mask out the individual layers. So on the first one, let's choose this mask layer and choose the second layer. Now choose the second layer and mask out the first layer, and that should give us a cutout of each layer on the previous layer. You'll see what I mean. There you go. On the plane we now have a cutout of the sphere, and on the sphere we now have a cutout of the plane, which is exactly what we want, and together they give us the identical output to the single composite, which is what we're after. But if I put the factor up to the final value, you'll see that the cutout is actually black and is not giving us the correct mix, and the reason for that is because we need to render an alpha channel. If we look at the alpha, you can see that it is simply a plain white image, and we have nothing to tell Blender that these images need to be transparent, if you see what I mean. So if we go into the render tab and come down to film, and we click the transparent icon, tick box, sorry, and then we can render it again, and now you can see there is an alpha channel, and what was black previously is now transparent and invisible. And if we look at the alpha channel, you can see the different layers, the mask layers are showing up as black and white images. And if we click the alpha on the mix node, you can see it's cut out, which is exactly what we want, and it's what we're going to need to use to put the thing together. But again, you'll notice the problem is the alpha is not working properly with the mix node, and this is a normal thing, so we need to change the node from a mix node to an alpha over node, and that will tell Blender to use the alphas and mix them together properly. As you can see, now that both nodes are connected to an alpha over, the output is now the proper sphere on a reflective plane, and everything is looking good. Okay, so far so good. Now we have control over our individual layers, and if we wish we can make any changes that we want. So let's have a look at that by dropping in an Rgb curve. If I just go to our add menu and drop in an Rgb curve and plug that into the sphere layer and move the red channel, we can see instantly that we have a bit of control there. Let's just move that up. There you go, it's gone nice and red, well pink, but you get the idea. And if we choose, we can make more changes by adding, let's say for example, a blur node. Drop in a blur and change that up a couple of pixels. Filter, blur, there we go, drop that in onto our plane, and we can blur out the reflection a little bit. Nice, there we go, lovely, there we go. But what if we needed a little bit more control? Say for example we wanted to change the colour of the shadow to match the sphere, which would be more natural. Let's just close these down. If we now go back to our render layers, and if we open up the passes, we now have a new selection of all the different options that we can use in our compositing. So if I choose the correct layer, the reflection layer in this case, and I can select the glossy, direct, indirect and colour passes, and then render that out again, you can see on our reflection plane node that we have now 3 new outputs, one for each of the glossy, direct, indirect and colour options. So let's just take a look at those quickly. First we have the glossy direct, which has very little information, and then we have the glossy direct, which has all the colour that we need to deal with. There we go, and it's just exclusively on its own. And then the glossy colour, which looks more like a mask. But in order to use the glossy direct passes, we're going to have to combine them together, and to do that we need a couple of mix nodes. So using Shift A, I'm going to press colour and choose a mix node, and then I'm going to connect up the glossy direct and the glossy indirect like so, and I'm going to switch the blending mode to add, and then I'm going to create another one by pressing Shift D, and I'm going to then connect up the colour. Switch that to multiply, and now you see the combination of those glossy indirect and glossy direct multiplied by the glossy colour recreates the original output of the original composite node, the original image. And now we can have control over those 3 factors. So if I duplicate this Rgb curve and drop it onto the colour, nothing happens because the colour is not the output that we wanted. So if I duplicate that again and I drop it up here onto the glossy direct, and we can see we changed the actual colour of the plane, which wasn't what I wanted. I should have dropped it onto the glossy indirect, but this shows you equally well just how useful it is, because now I can change the colour of the background plane to make it anything I want, and I could use an image here if I wanted to get a reflection on there of some other description, or I could cut it out completely. And obviously the more render passes that I select, the more control I will have over the individual layers. And I hope with this small example you can see just how powerful and effective this technique could be in your final renders. And we are going to leave it here for this one, as we will be covering more about render passes as we come across the relevant nodes for them in later videos. But for now, let's hang it up, and I will see you next time. If you found this video useful, remember to like and subscribe and share with your friends. Also, you can now support us on Patreon for exclusive tutorials, live streams and giveaways. Or you can simply drop us a comment here or on our social media. Links will be in the description. And with that, I will see you all next time. Goodbye for now.